And we're off and running on the Krueg Show Friday, June the 9th, 11 a.m. on the West Coast. That would make it, 2 p.m. on the East Coast. Who cares about the East Coast? Jack's on the West Coast. I'm on the West Coast. But welcome to the Krueg Show, brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in Northern California. Check them out in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week in Marin. And they are open Wednesday through Sunday in Emeryville, inside the Emeryville Public Marketplace. Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Jack Hammer back by popular demand. Today we're simulcasting on my channel and his channel. Jack, good morning. Good to see you, man. Long time no see.
Yeah, I haven't seen you since Wednesday. It's good to see you.
Seriously, you've changed so much. Well, I wanted to, talk about a number of things, but I entitled the live stream, "What will be success this year for the 49ers?" And it's funny. I mean, we're so geared to, I like the same way that Jed is geared for this, and Shanahan, you feel, is geared for it, and Lynch, is only sticking around for this. And it's all about not just winning. It's not about making the playoffs. It's not about being 500. It's not about winning a playoff game. It's not about making it to the NFC Championship game. It's not about making it to the Super Bowl. It's about securing the 6th Lombardi trophy, winning the Super Bowl. And in my opinion, anything short of that is not going to be viewed as success. And that's a lonely lane to be in. That's a tough standard. I think we all have to kind of realize here in June, a month before camp, that when you have that standard of you win the Super Bowl or it hasn't been a success, it creates tension. It creates anxiety. It sets the bar at its highest level. There's very few teams in the NFL that have that standard, honestly, if they were being truly honest with themselves. Maybe the Niners, maybe the Chiefs and Eagles. I think everybody else is like, hey, the playoffs would be good, or the championship game would be good. Not so with the Niners, Chiefs, and Eagles. What do you think of that standard of you win the Super Bowl or it hasn't been a successful year?
Yeah, that's where the 49ers have been for a long time. It hasn't, going back into the days of DeBartolo, right? But where they are right now under Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, especially after the last 4 years with, a trip to the Super Bowl, a couple of back-to-back NFC Championship games, you look at this roster, you look at everything that they've put together, and if this team isn't in the Super Bowl holding the Lombardi trophy at the end of the year, I do agree with you that this would be a failure of a season. I mean, they're still going to, it still could be a good season, but in terms of overall what their goals are this year, the goal is always to win the Super Bowl. But I think this year in 2023, with everything that's going on in terms of the players that they've brought in, they're still in the middle of a solid window, but you have a couple of these key guys that are getting a little bit longer in the tooth in terms of their contracts and so on. So I think this year the 49ers really need to come out with the Lombardi trophy at the end of the year for it to be able to be ruled as a success. I mean,
where do you think that comes from, that expectation? Does it come from Jed because Jed wants that elusive 6th, which would be his first running the franchise? Is that fire lit? I mean, I would say I was watching the Jerry Rice Football Life last night. And it was so clear there were sprinkles of Eddie D in there. And it was like Niner night on the NFL Network. They had highlights of the Super Bowl 23, Super Bowl 24. And it just took me back to the 80s and 90s. And it just was a reminder that in so many ways, despite Walsh and Ronnie and Joe and Jerry and Charles and, all the different awesome players and coaches the Niners had, it was Eddie D who really kind of fueled it's Super Bowl or bust kind of a thing. He was in some ways the guy who set the standard. Who do you think sets the standard for the Niners? Is it us, the media? Is it the fans because of the history of the franchise? Who is driving the standard in the present for the 49ers?
I think in the present, it's coming mostly from the two guys at the top in terms of the football side of it. And I'm saying that as far as Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. I think they're the ones that really drive it. Jed York talks a big game at times, but then he also was giving out contract extensions to these guys after a Super Bowl loss and those types of things. So I think it really comes no more from Lynch and Shanahan. They both, I think, see this window as open, but starting to narrow. And I think that they realize that if they're going to get one for their own legacy in terms of their position as a coach and as a front office executive, I think they both realize that they need to get over the hump and actually get this thing to the finish line for a change. So I think it's really coming from those two. I'm sure there's a little bit of it coming from Jed York, but I think it's coming more from the other two.
One other thing that just absolutely screamed out to me, Khalil Young, by the way, says, I was watching the same thing, Larry. Yeah, I mean, it was a great night. Anytime I see, it was like Super Bowl highlights of the Niners, then Football Life, Jerry, then Football Life, Ronnie, then Football Life, Dwight Clark. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I want to switch the channel, but I'm like, you know what? I don't want to switch the channel. I've watched all these shows before. Then finally I did switch the channel, but I taped the DC Football Life. But watching the Ronnie and Jerry one, it was pretty clear. I mean, Steve Young had a great line at the end of the Jerry Football Life where he's like, hey, man, it was 3 days after we won the Super Bowl. And I go to the facility and there's nobody there. And there's hardly anybody in the office. There's nobody in the locker room. And I go over to one of the windows. I look down on the field and Jerry is running patterns. And it was like, for Steve, he was like, that to me was just a glimpse of what made Jerry Jerry. And then I watched the Ronnie Football Life. And it's so obvious that Ronnie was a tone setter player. Jerry was a tone setter player to the point where when the Niners had a Deion Sanders, it was like, hey, Deion, Jerry even says it in the thing, you've got baggage. We show up and work, and the strong point from Deion was like, Jerry didn't enjoy the ride, man. Jerry just didn't enjoy the ride. And Deion wanted to enjoy the ride. Different personality types. But watching Jerry and watching Ronnie, it was a reminder that the 49er players also had their own, we play to this standard, and you either play to our standard or there's the effing door. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of wondering from your perspective, I've got a couple ideas, but we're in the locker room. We talk to the players. We're on the field. We see the interactions. Who are the tone setting players for the 49ers currently? Who are the guys that are like, you know what? This is the way we practice. This is the way we prepare. This is the way we play. And I'm going to play at this standard. And if you don't meet it, you're not here. Who's today's Ronnie? Who's today's Jerry?
Well, I think that today's Jerry is Christian McCaffrey. By what we've seen of him just in the short time, we didn't really get to watch much of him last year, the way, because he came in the middle of the season. But just watching the way that he's worked during OTAs and minicamp, it's reminiscent of the stories you've heard about Jerry Rice and the way that he would, it was full go every play, taking the ball to the end zone every time he touched it. That's what Christian McCaffrey reminds me of on the offensive side. Over on the defensive side, I would say that comes from Fred Warner, although we haven't seen him on the field yet during the offseason program. He's been out there, but not actually participating in practice. But I would say he's the tone setter on the defensive side because he's the vocal one. I know Nick Bosa is the guy that probably makes the biggest difference in terms of his ability to get to the quarterback and those types of things. When it comes to the leadership side, I think it really comes from Fred Warner. I think he sets the tone for the defense overall. And I think it's those two, Christian McCaffrey and Fred Warner, are the top two tone setters for this team.
I think one of the issues of this offseason is that I think they lost one of their tone setters in Jimmy Ward. I think Jimmy was definitely that kind of a player. My votes would go definitely with McCaffrey, who's very quiet and understated, but the way he goes about his work, where he's just full bore and he's going all the way down the field, and he's like the quiet guy that sets the example, not by what he says, but by how he plays. I think George Kittle is also that guy. I would say McCaffrey and Kittle and maybe Brock Purdy if he, really commandeers the starting job and grows into the role. I could see him being the third guy on offense. On defense, I would say it's definitely Fred Warner. Maybe a little bit of Dre Greenlaw as far as tone setter, as far as physicality. But I'll tell you the guy that I think is kind of growing into that role is Talanoa Hufanga. Hufanga has a attention to detail, a seriousness, a leadership about him. He cares a lot about being a good football player. I don't know that I see him getting in anybody's face and challenging them as much as just leading by example. But he seems to me to be, even though he's a very young player and he wasn't even a day one or day two pick, I see some real leadership qualities there in Talanoa. What do you think?
I agree with you. And he's earned that right. He was an all-pro last year. And so you look at, we're out of practice. I spent a lot of the last 2 days on Tuesday and Wednesday down the field so that I can see things a little bit differently. And that's kind of where the DBs usually hang out when they're on the sidelines. And there was more than a couple of occasions where you'd see Talanoa Hufanga come off to the sideline, and he's not just standing there. He's talking to either the guys that he was on the field with about things that they need to adjust on or what he's seen, or talking to the other safeties that are on the sideline about what's going on, what they're doing, and what they're seeing as well. So he's definitely taking on a leadership role on the back end of the 49ers defense for sure.
And I'll say this, as far as the young players, I could see now, obviously there's a lot of projection. He's got to do it on the field. He hasn't even made the team or established himself in the NFL, but I could kind of see Jair Brown down the road being that kind of a player as well. He just seems like that. He seems like a guy that really loves football, really is a great player for the room, and a guy who, when you see guys like focused and getting better over, OTA 1 to OTA 2 to the mini camp, that they're all in, and he just seems like an all in type player. He's not there yet as a leader, but you can see where there's potential there.
Yeah, you could see the personality traits just when he's talking to us before rookie minicamp. You can hear the way that he goes about his business, the way that he's looking at the opportunity. It's clear why the 49ers liked him besides what he does on the field. So I could definitely see Jair Brown, if he's successful on the field, developing into that type of a role on the back end of the defense as well. I think that'd be a really nice safety tandem for the long term for the 49ers if it works out.
I don't know if you know a guy named Dove Kleiman, but he covers the NFL, I think out of the Denver market, maybe. I'm guessing on that. But he put out a tweet today. He's one of the guys I follow on Twitter. He puts out a lot of interesting stuff. And he said he tweeted today that Jets head coach Robert Saleh says the Jets don't want to be on Hard Knocks this season. And, of course, the decision is not up to them. The league can force teams, and they've got prerequisites. If you make the playoffs, you don't have to be on Hard Knocks. And there's 3 or 4. If you were on last year, you don't have to be on Hard Knocks. And there's 3 or 4 different ways to get out of it. That the league is set up, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. That if you're good enough to make the playoffs, you can avoid Hard Knocks. But I think it's interesting that Saleh doesn't want to be a part of it, because the one thing that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, not the one thing, but one thing that they absolutely do agree on is they want no part of this for the Niners. Now, I love Hard Knocks. I love the documentary. I always loved training camp when I was in pro football, and to me, it's the essence of pro football, the coming together of a group of men, players and coaches. You're talking about over 100 people, common goal, a lot of type A personalities, and I just love it. I love the documentary style. I think you get insights into your thinking, into the personalities, and I would love, as a fan, to see the 49ers on there. But I love more that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan don't want the 49ers to be on there. And I think they're right in not wanting to be on there, because I think they feel like if you allow people in your building to understand how you make decisions and get a glimpse at your mindset, that you're really giving them a significant insight into your thinking. And the way the NFL is, everything's very covert, and we don't want to give away anything, and we don't want the other teams to know how we're thinking. but the league can force one of these 4 teams to be in Hard Knocks this year: the Jets, the Bears, the Saints, and the Washington Commanders. One, which of those 4 teams, which team would you like to see on there? And then give me your thoughts on the 49ers, like very, very strong determination to never appear.
I think it'd be interesting to see the Washington team on there just because of all the upheaval that's going on around that team. Be interesting to see how Ron Rivera is dealing with getting them ready to go. Plus, they're one of those fringe teams. They just barely missed the playoffs last year, so they're right on the edge. So it'd be fun to watch a team that's close instead of, a team. Usually, the teams that are on Hard Knocks are the teams that aren't close. So it'd be good to see a team that actually has a good shot at making the playoffs. And I think Washington would be one of those teams. In terms of the 49ers, I don't know if it's so much about giving away secrets as it is the distraction of having the cameras around all the time. Because you get those cameras in the building, people start acting differently, even though they try not to. They're still going to be acting. They're still kind of on camera. They're still kind of trying to be at times maybe someone they're not. Plus, there's the distraction of I believe in those they have little bits where those guys come in and they have to sit down with the crew and talk and all those kind of things. I think that just creates a distraction that the team doesn't want to have around them. Hard Knocks is a really good program. It's very similar to like Last Chance U with the junior college route, right? That you had with Netflix. And the one thing that I noticed with that is that they did the first couple of years, they went back to the same school twice. And in both those cases, the second year was just really crazy in terms of, everybody realized that they were on TV and everybody was going, just crazy stuff happened. You had the crazy guy in, at the second one who still bounces around on YouTube and Twitter now after he got fired there. And then, the second year in East Mississippi, I think it was, they have a big brawl and all kinds of stuff goes down there, and just an interesting way. And I think the 49ers want to avoid any of those kind of distractions. Not saying that kind of stuff would happen, but still, it's a distraction. You're going to have people following you around all the time. And, Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and these guys, they're not bad guys, but you put cameras in people's faces and you start to act a little bit differently.
Yeah, it's funny though. I don't know if you noticed, a few years ago during I think the Harbaugh era, the Niners played the Jaguars in London, and they were part of kind of like a Hard Knocks week in London where the cameras went to their practices. Did you remember? Did you remember seeing any of that?
I don't remember that. No.
Okay, so they had this one scene that was just awesome. They're at training camp, not training camp. They're at practice in London, and Justin the Cowboy Smith is standing there next to Dante Whitner, and they're live mic, and Dante Whitner's freaking out because there's a bee that's like chasing him, right? and you hear Justin Smith go, "Man, I thought you were a badass from Cleveland. You're afraid of a bumblebee." I mean, it was just, and it's little anecdotes like that literally mean nothing, but it gives you some, I don't know, insight, but just a little bit of personality of the players. And heck, that to me, that's one of the reasons I love covering the 49ers, in person, is in getting a chance to go in the locker room and talk to the guys, because you have a much better sense of the team when you kind of understand the personalities. But just seeing Justin Smith, who's a rough and tough guy, and Whitner, who's a tough guy too, but there are some people that are afraid of bees, and Whitner was like, going crazy, swatting that bee, and he's like, "Man, I thought you were a badass from Cleveland. You're afraid of a bumblebee." I mean, it was awesome. All right, I was on today. We're going from 11 to noon. Why? Because I got a jet to the city. I'm on an afternoon drive with Dan Dibley, sitting in for Mark Willard on 95.7 The Game on the FM dial. And I was on yesterday on a guest hit with Steiny and Guru, and one of the questions they asked me was, "What do I think about the division?" And I said, "Well, Arizona's kind of sitting it out. It sounds like Kyler's not going to be there till week 5. They got rid of Hopkins. They didn't need to. They just chose to. I think Arizona, you can put a line through them. I think the Rams are going to be better than they were last year, but not nearly good enough to be a contender." And they were asking, where do I put Seattle and the Niners? And it took me back to this article that I read the other day from Mike Clay from ESPN, who says the Seahawks are better than the Niners. And I just think that's one of the most preposterous takes I've heard of the offseason. I like Seattle's draft. I think I went position by position, and I think Seattle is the number one contender to the Niners in the division. And I think Devin Witherspoon, the corner that they just added out of Illinois, is a monster. I love him. And I think they've got John Schneider's had back-to-back big-time drafts. And I'm reading an article this morning that Zach Charbonnet, the UCLA rookie running back, has really shined at their OTAs. And Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker sound like are going to get a lot of run together in that backfield. That's a really good tandem. But this team was 26th in the NFL against the run, 24th overall on defense. The Niners were number one on defense, number one against the run. And to me, it's just a huge slap in the face of the 49ers that anybody would consider Seattle the team to beat in this division. What do you think? I mean, do you agree that Seattle's the top contender in the division? And how close are these teams? Could you understand the person that looks at both teams and says the Seahawks are better?
No, I can't understand anybody that would say that the Seahawks are better now. I can understand somebody that says, well, the Seahawks are on the rise. If you told me that the 49ers and Seahawks are the top two teams and the Seahawks are the biggest challenger for the 49ers, I would agree with you. But I think the Seahawks, they're about a year away from where they would be able to possibly say they're better than the 49ers, because they do have a lot of good young talent that they've added. But I think you need to see where they are this year. I don't think they're ready to beat the 49ers yet. I think they're going to be able to compete with them, but I think the 49ers overall are the more talented team across the board. And I think, if Seattle's going to finish ahead of the 49ers this year, it's because Brock Purdy is not performing at the same level he was last year, or he's not playing at all. And then you have Sam Darnold or Trey Lance, kind of playing to the same level that they've played in the past. And if that's the case, then I think that's the only way Seattle overcomes the 49ers.
I mean, I think Seattle's got a really good young secondary. I mean, and it's amazing how quickly John Schneider built that thing. Devin Witherspoon, Kobe Bryant, Tariq Woolen, big corners, really good corners. I mean, maybe outstanding corners, maybe the greatest group of corner talent in the league right now. I'm not a Jamal Adams fan. Quandre Diggs is a hell of a player. But, I think their secondary is really, really good. And, Nwosu, the linebacker, the right outside backer, I got nothing but respect for him. But I just don't think that they didn't stop the run last year, and they haven't really brought in anybody that makes me think that they will stop the run this year. So, to me, that's a major thing. If you can't stop the run in the NFL, guess what you get? You get a full dose of somebody else's running game. I do like their drafts, and I do think they're the clear number 2 in the division. But I think people just need to pump the brakes. I mean, I don't see that guy on their front 7. I know they added Bobby Wagner back, and that should provide some leadership. But I don't see their front 7 being really. I don't see that anchor that they added that's going to change their dynamic. I think they're still challenged very much up front.
Yeah, I think that's where the 49ers can get them, right? You have a much better running game. The 49ers' physicality up front on the running game really helps them out, and then that opens up the pass behind it. Even though Seattle has a decent secondary, when you're struggling to stop the run, and so you're having to bring your guys up, it opens up things, other holes in the secondary, and that's what we've seen from the 49ers this last season when they took on Seattle, especially with Brock Purdy at the end of the year, even with Jimmy Garoppolo back in week 2, right? The 49ers were able to take advantage of Seattle through the air. I know they started off running the ball really well in that game in week 2, but then, Garoppolo comes in, it's part of that game plan, and he's able to get down the field against them. You saw that from Brock Purdy up in Seattle in the game when the 49ers clinched the NFC West, and then they did it again. I mean, he averaged almost 13 yards per attempt in terms of average depth of target, Brock Purdy in that playoff game. So I think their inability to stop the run opens up everything else, because they have to focus so much on trying to stop it that the passing defense can struggle at times as a result.
Let's get into the OTAs and the mini camp. You did a statistical breakdown of the quarterbacks, comparing Darnold and Lance and Brandon Allen, and the passing stats, and I'm always a little dubious on the camp stats because it's practice and I just don't put a lot into it. And if you know, like I still can't get anybody to really tell me if a quarterback drops back to pass in practice and it's a pass play and he looks left and the window closes and then he looks in the middle of the field and he pump fakes and then he drifts to the right and then he runs 5 yards and runs out of bounds. What is, is that that's not an interception. It's not an incompletion. It's not it's not a sack. What is it? You know what I mean? What in that situation, because we see these plays all the time in camp. And to me, that one example distorts all the numbers right there, because if you tuck it and run after your timing missed the windows, well, it's probably a sack or an incompletion, or it could be a turnover in the actual game. But in practice, what does it get marked down as?
You do your best to try to say if it might have been a sack or not. Just kind of depends at times. Don't get into that too much because I think there's so much gray area there. But I will make a note of it if I see the quarterback holding the ball and it looks like he held it past. I'll make a note of that and put that down. Or like an example from the last practice on Wednesday where you have Sam Darnold, on a bootleg out to his right side and everybody looks covered, so he tucks it and runs for a few yards, but he misses Brandon Ayuk wide open in the middle of the field. Ayuk's running across and the guy's underneath him, and he realizes his role in that is that he needs to stop, because if he stops, he's going to be wide open. And the quarterback just takes his eyes off from downfield and he doesn't see it and runs out of bounds. Instead of a 15 big, kind of a big play, you end up with just a short gain, that kind of stuff. So I'll make notes of that. I tried to put I put as much as I can into the post-practice reports on stuff like that. And I do see where you're coming from, because we see some of that with Sam Darnold. You see that happen a little bit with Trey Lance. At least I'm just talking about this year's practices so far. So that is one of the pieces of it that's tough. You look at the numbers like from 7-on-7 in particular, where that favors the quarterback. There's no rush in front of them. There's when you're throwing checkdowns in 7-on-7, that's not a hard throw at all. And we saw a lot of that in the first couple of days that we were out there.
Who's been the best quarterback on the field? Darnold, Lance, Allen? Is there there's a number of different reports. If you listen to different people, some people feel like I saw Grant said that he felt like the 49ers are now pushing Brandon Allen because they have seen enough of Sam Darnold and don't feel like he's the guy. That's Grant's perspective. I don't know. I don't even know if I could make even that level of a concrete evaluation based on it. And I've been there for every minute of it. Darnold's had his moments. Trey's had his moments. Heck, Brandon Allen had a couple dimes in the OTAs last go around, not necessarily in the minicamp, but in the OTAs. What do your stats tell you as far as how they grade out, and what do your eyes tell you?
Both of them to me say that these guys they're the same guy. You got them. You look at the overall numbers, and Darnold, has a higher completion percentage than Lance, but then you take out those 7-on-7 numbers and you just look at what they did during team, and they're the same guy. They both completed about 57% of their passes in the team stuff. Lance was 12 of 21, Darnold 11 of 19. So they're the same guy. You have one guy that's been in the league going, this is his sixth offseason. You got another guy that's in his third, and they're right there neck and neck. I felt like that coming in, and they haven't done anything to really stand out from each other. Lance has a little bit better arm, so he's going to be able to throw the ball a little bit further at times, but Darnold sometimes can be a little bit more accurate. He's going to be, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other right now. If you were asking if they had to play a game tomorrow, I would say I'd probably start Trey Lance just because he's the younger guy and he has more potential upside.
Do you think why do you think all these players decided to come to the Niners? I mean, Brandon Allen was number 2 to Joe Burrow, and he came here to be really fourth on the depth chart. And Sam Darnold was starting at the end of the year for Carolina. He came here to be the 3rd guy on the depth chart. Are they coming here because of Shanahan, or are they coming here to because the 49ers are a Super Bowl favorite in the NFC? Are they coming here because of the weaponry that the Niners have across the board? I mean, there's a lot of people that are like, hey, Kyle Shanahan gets his quarterbacks hurt. Are these backup quarterbacks coming here because of a negative? Because this offense, maybe they agree with that that quarterbacks will continue to be hurt in this offense, and thus there'll be opportunity. I mean, what's your read on why guys that would seemingly have options to be higher on other teams' depth charts are coming here to be lower on the Niners depth chart?
With a guy like Brandon Allen, he's been a kind of a journeyman backup his entire career. So I don't know if doesn't seem like Cincinnati was really, trying hard to keep him there. So they were fine with letting him go. And what we saw of Brandon Allen once he was put behind the offensive and defensive lines kind of bears out that he especially on his last practice, that was the most we saw of him in team with an offensive and defensive group in front of him. And in terms of the linemen, and his numbers dropped off quite precipitously compared to where he was earlier in practices. And with Darnold, I think it's similar. I don't think there's very many teams that were really beating down the door for him. And I think, like in Darnold's case, this is a really good spot to come in and compete. I think that's what the 49ers sold him on, was to come compete with Trey Lance, come and compete with Brock Purdy and see where you can land. And I do agree. I think that coming to the 49ers, a team that has a lot of talent around you, a coach who does a very good job of making the most for quarterbacks in his system, in addition to all the injuries that you've seen from this team over the course of the last 6 years at the quarterback spot. Yeah, go there and see if you get an opportunity and maybe you're able to, revitalize your career. I think it's kind of similar to what we saw with the quarterback who's now with Pittsburgh. He was drafted by the Bears. Trubisky was drafted by the Bears. Nobody wanted him. He went and spent a year up in Buffalo with a good staff up there. And then from there, he was able to get a starting job elsewhere. So I think that's where a guy specifically like Sam Darnold, I think that's the direction he's trying to go. Come here, rebuild himself a little bit, and then go somewhere else once if he's able to perform at enough level to be able to become a starting.
Is the loser of this a trade candidate? I heard somebody say today, hey, you know what? Trade Sam Darnold to the Raiders at the end of camp if Trey improves and beats Sam Darnold out and you got Brandon Allen sitting there. Could you see the 49ers doing that? Or is the kind of deal that he signed with them, give us indications that he's going to be here? I mean, what's your assessment? I mean, we've obviously floated out the different, reading tea leaves that it sounds like Trey could be moved, but we haven't really discussed the idea of maybe the other two guys being highly coveted between Allen and Darnold by other teams at the cutdown. Could you envision the 49ers if Lance, clearly beat out those two guys? I mean, it seems like Darnold would be too good of a player to cut, right? He started 6 games at the end of last year. What's your assessment of that? Do you think there'll be teams that would actually give up draft pick compensation in the 2024 draft for either Brandon Allen or Sam Darnold if they wind up losing the competition and don't have a roster spot?
No, not Brandon Allen. I don't think anybody would give up anything there. In terms of Sam Darnold, possibly, maybe there's something, maybe they give him something. I don't even know if it'd be 2024, more of like 2025. We'll see how he does and that kind of thing. I don't see it happening there. And I don't see the 49ers wanting to trade any of these 3 guys unless Brock Purdy comes back and he is fully healthy and that he can go out there and he's going to execute the offense and you're full go with him. And then maybe you trade one of these quarterbacks. And I think that's where you probably have more of a Trey Lance trade happen. But this has been the topic all off season, right? Is, when you brought up the possibility of trading Trey Lance before the draft, the big pushback was, why would they trade Trey Lance? Didn't you just see what happened? Didn't you see how the 49ers needed 4 quarterbacks last year and all this kind of stuff? And now we're right back to the same conversation. And I don't think it's going to happen. I think the 49ers know that they need that room to be as solid as they can from top to bottom, just in case. And they've already built out the roster. They have $9 million in cap space as it is. could free up a little bit more depending on how the deal comes down with Nick Bosa. So I don't see them from a financial standpoint having to do it, and from a team building standpoint, with the way that they've built this roster, I don't see them wanting to trade one of these quarterbacks for a future pick. And I know you've said a number of times, you've said that if the 49ers are going to trade a guy like Lance, whatever, it needs to be somebody that's really going to help them out or what have you. I just don't see them being able to get that done.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to trade him unless I get a piece to the puzzle that helps me win the Super Bowl this year.
Right.
Because you may need him to help you win the Super Bowl. And if I'm going to move him, I got to get something back that's going to help him win the Super Bowl. Somebody asked me yesterday, hey, you've been at camp all last year, and you were at camp, this year. How does Trey Lance look different to you? Can you verbalize the differences from last year in training camp to this year in the OTAs and minicamp? What would you say? I mean, to me, my thing was just like, I'm seeing a better ball. I'm seeing a more relaxed player, and I'm seeing a player who looks, and this is just me reading this. It looks like he's thinking less and reacting more. Those were my takeaways, but you're right there watching the same stuff I'm watching. What did Trey look like last year? What does he look like this year? What is the difference from this year to last year?
I don't think there is a difference. I think that's the biggest thing for me. I went back and I was looking at, we talked about this a few weeks ago, and then I went back after practice on Wednesday, and I looked back at what I wrote after last season's OTAs about Trey Lance's performance. And, a lot of talk about a quicker release, the accuracy being better. Last year during OTAs and minicamp, Trey Lance completed 74.5% of his passes, actually 74.6. This year, he was at 63.6. The only way he gets to the numbers that he put up last year is if you add the 6 drops that he had against them, and then he gets to the same number. But he had drops last year too, so that those aren't perfect numbers. What I saw from Trey Lance, I do agree with you. I think there was a little bit looser feel to his game. You could see the ball at times be a little bit better in terms of the rotation on the ball. I felt like Tuesday's practice was the best we saw from him all off season. There was a series of plays late in practice where I think it was 3 of them where he rips the ball down the field, to different various receivers, Ayuk and Danny Gray and so on. It was a really nice stretch for him to finish off practice. But that's not anything that we haven't seen from him already. We saw that from him last year in training camp, where there would be parts of camp where he'd be really good, and you'd be like, "Damn, this is the guy." And then there's the other parts where it's like, that's not so much. And these guys are going to go through ups and downs throughout practices. That's to be understood. I just don't see him necessarily being much different than he was in the past. And Kyle Shanahan said it too, not to us, but. Where he felt like last year, if Lance had been in throughout the entire season, he would have been able to put up numbers similar to Brock Purdy. And, I think he's basing that off of what we just saw too. I mean, he doesn't look different than what he has in years past. You're seeing the same things from him. But it's just a matter of him getting reps, and maybe he becomes more consistent with it.
It's funny. I heard Matt Barrows doing an interview, and he was talking about how him and Lombardi chart the throws as well, and that he actually thinks that it's reflective because he says that, that Trey's been, in the mid 50s completion percentage wise. And then if you go back and look at his, his game stuff going back to North Dakota, that's basically where he is. So he actually feels like, that the charting of the passes in camp is a useful exercise and does reflect what you're going to see on the field. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, especially when you take into account what they're doing during the team portion. So from what Matt is saying, and I agree with him, you look at what Trey Lance did in training camp last offseason. He was around 58% in training camp last year. That's around where his total career number is in that 58% range. You look at his numbers from this last offseason, these 4 practices during the team portions. Like I said, he's 12 of 21. That's 57.8%, right around there. That's right around where he's been throughout his entire career. Yeah, he has a couple of drops, like I said. He had the interception. Um, the drops, he had drops last year, so forget that part of it. The interception, I think is one that you look at the way that interception occurred. Trey Lance has had a problem with getting balls batted down at the line of scrimmage in his career, and it's still there. He's a little late. The off defensive lineman, is watching his eyes, does a really nice job, gets up, gets his hands on it, and brings it down. And we've seen Lance do this stuff in the past.
A couple supers, 2 gray beard hairs, great moniker. He says, "Can someone please tell Grant to feed his cat?" I have no idea what that's about. Glass half full guy says, "Do you guys think that J-Cor Pearson could make the team just to be a kick returner in this mini camp?" I got a report that J-Cor Pearson was working out. I believe Jack Cohn, the former Notre Dame and Wisconsin quarterback, was working out. When do we know the results of these workouts? Do we know if these guys are going to be camp invites? There's a 90-man roster. They did make a move, adding a defensive lineman, Darryl Johnson, cutting Shea Wyatt, a wide receiver. When Shanahan was asked about that, he said, "We're a little deep at wide receiver." The next day, you've got J-Cor Pearson, who's 5'7", who played at Ole Miss. A lot of people feel like there's a 4.25 kind of speedster there. He played in the XFL. He was one of the more productive receivers. He's a tiny guy, but man, I really love his film and his ability to separate. I was really excited when they worked him out. What do you make of there were more than those 2 guys. I think there was 4 or 5 other guys, but to me, those were the most interesting guys on the list. Pearson, who was a star in the XFL and looks like he could be a dynamic, maybe a return guy, as Glass Half Full guy suggests. But what I just loved is that, the NFL at wide receiver is so much about, it used to be about, your route running, and it is to some degree, but it's also so much about just big playability. And a lot of what I look for now in receivers is just, can you separate from coverage due to your speed and quickness in and out of your breaks and that kind of thing? What's your read on Pearson's workout? This is his second. And what's your read on Cohn's workout? And do you think the Niners will sign either or both?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they brought Pearson back, especially considering they had him here during the rookie minicamp. There must be something that they wanted to get another look at with him. In terms of the question as far as making the team as a kick returner, I don't think so necessarily. I think the 49ers are pretty happy with what they have there from Ray McLeod. I think they like him as a kick returner, at least for this season. So I don't see Pearson making the team in that regard. I would say, the 49ers have some trouble at the back end of the receiver room in terms of guys that can catch the ball. We talked about drops. There was 13 that I charted during training camp. Ronnie Bell, who had a really strong start training camp at the off-season program. Ronnie Bell had a really strong start. He started to struggle. He had a couple of drops. Danny Gray, a couple of drops, and Danny Gray just really never showed a whole lot. But of course, he still hasn't. And I think at the back end of the 49ers receiving room right now, there's some questions. And so maybe, you bring in a guy like Pearson to compete with those guys and maybe try to get some push going.
Give me your takeaways from minicamp and OTAs. Who, without me leading you in any direction, who impressed you? Who really shined? I mean, you're out there. You got a great sense of it. Who stood out to you?
Well, a couple. The name that's on there right now on the screen, Deshaun Jamison, really stood out to me over the 2 practices in minicamp on Tuesday and Wednesday. To me, it was interesting because, during OTAs, you can't really get your hands, can't be too physical as a DB, but that changes during minicamp. And you can start to play the game more, and you can start to get more physical and get your hands on these guys. And I think he really stood out from that. I think I felt like if he can carry this over, if he can carry that performance from Tuesday and Wednesday over into training camp, there's a possibility that he would make the team over a guy like Darrell Luter Jr., who the team used a draft pick on, because he was right there. And I say that because he's in coverage, he's around the ball, he's making plays on the ball. Luter, we've already seen him struggle with keeping guys in front of him. So I really think that Jamison has a strong case to be made here to make this roster. So I think he's one of them. Brandon Ayuk, obviously. Brandon Ayuk's clearly the best receiver on the field for the 49ers right now. I know Deebo Samuel hasn't been out there other than just individual stuff, but when they get to the the team stuff, man, Ayuk just separates himself and he's open constantly. And so Ayuk looked really, really sharp. Colton McKivitz is another one who stood out to me. It's very similar
in what way? In what way, Jack?
Well, because we got to see him at least on Tuesday and Wednesday working against the defensive linemen. That was the first time we saw him a little bit, I guess, during OTAs, but those were very small sample sizes, and these were small sample sizes too, but just still more reps. And he was doing a really good job against Drake Jackson, keeping him off of the quarterback, keeping Kerry Hyder Jr. and Clelin Ferrell, those three. Nobody really. He wasn't. I don't know if he really gave up any pressure. He was doing a really nice job in pass protection, and that's the question mark with him. McKivitz is a guy who we know he can do a good job in the run game. It's how can he hold up in pass protection, and the early returns I think are positive. And if he can kind of build on that over these next 45 days, and then go into training camp and continue to work that out, I think there's a good chance that he's going to be like the Jake Brendel of last year. Jake Brendel, a lot of question marks around that position last year, a lot of questions around even Aaron Banks as well. I think this is a guy who people don't know much about him. He's not getting paid very much, but I think he's going to be able to hold his own in this offense.
It's funny. We had Demo Lenore speak to us at the podium after practice the other day, and he was asked that question, which receiver stands out? And he didn't pause. He said Brandon Ayuk. Is Ayuk considered, do you think, better than Debo?
They're different players, and I would say, the thing, he's coming off a season that was better than Debo Samuel, that's for sure. And I think Debo Samuel recognized that when he spoke at the podium on Tuesday. I think that Ayuk and Samuel are two guys that, if they're fully healthy, could really take this team from a receiver standpoint over the top, because they're going to get the most targets and touches. And really quick, one of the things, we've talked a lot, I'm going to kind of veer off of this just for a second, but we've talked a lot about the 49ers passing game and the nature of the 49ers passing game. And one of the things I'll say is, with Brandon Ayuk and Brock Purdy and so on, they showed the ability to stretch the defense vertically, right? And then you have a guy like Christian McCaffrey who's able to be that check down guy. And the 49ers offense, especially over the second half of the season when they were really putting up big numbers, they were stretching the teams all over the field. And that's why I think Purdy had such a high completion percentage, and why there were so many wide open throws over the middle, is because defenses all of a sudden had to respect the deep ball, and they also had to worry about the short balls to Christian McCaffrey. And I think it really opened up everything. And that's where Brandon Ayuk really helps this team, because he's the guy that takes the top off. And then you have Christian McCaffrey kind of work in the middle underneath, and you have Debo that can work that area. And then you also have a guy like you have George Kittle, and you have Kyle Juszczyk, who could run those little wheel routes that they run so well on those shot plays, that it just really puts a lot of stress on that defense. Opens up so much for the quarterback and for Kyle Shanahan.
I saw that you tweeted out that Deshaun Jameson and Spencer Wagee both stood out to you. You're with me on Wagee. Give me your thoughts on what you're seeing with him.
He's just he has the athleticism of a defensive end, but the size of a defensive tackle. And the bits that I've been able to watch of him, he's more impressive to me than the defensive lineman that they took out of Georgia. They're both very explosive off the line. Yeah, Beal. They're both very explosive off the line of scrimmage, and that's the one thing. We're talking about who stood out. I think I look at it, and the draft class really didn't stand out once we got to OTAs, minicamp. Excuse me. They did well the first day of OTAs that we were there, but they really faded to the background as things went along. And other than Jake Moody hitting a 63-yard field goal on Wednesday, there just really wasn't much to talk about from the drafted rookie class. I mean,
Jalen Graham to me has been pretty consistently good, but I generally agree with you that your sentiment here.
Well, and the only reason I say that with Graham, the only reason I say that too is with Graham, I felt strongly about him, but he's working with the third unit. He's not even working with the second. And that second unit, that first unit right now is the second unit, right? Because Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw are on the field. So that group that's the first one out is really your backups. The second group is kind of like your thirds. And then you have the third group kind of being like your fours in terms of the linebackers. And that's where he's working. They have him they have him working towards the end there. I like him. I think he can really move. I'm excited to see what he can do once they start to thump. D Winters, I noticed he was a little bit higher in the rotation. None of this really means a whole lot because they're just trying to get these guys reps. So we'll get a better idea of what this looks like, about a week or two into training camp. But I agree with, I like Graham. Cameron Latu made a really nice big throw play, and I guess he was 7-on-7 though. On Wednesday, it was nice to see him catch a pass down the field. That was, I think, only the second catch we saw from him throughout the entire offseason.
I'll tell you, one of the guys who really, to me, looks really good is Jordan Mason. And I don't know what the deal is with Elijah Mitchell. What's your guess on the couple that, we only have 5 or 6 minutes left, but Elijah Mitchell's health, Javon Kinlaw's health. We didn't see Kinlaw this round of minicamp. What's your guess on those two guys, and what did you think so far of Mason?
I think Mason, I think we know what he can do as a running back. I think he proved himself to be a valuable back, kind of in that closer role, that second guy off the bench that does a good job of holding on to the ball. He's not, so they can depend on him in that regard. We saw him make some big plays throughout. So I really think that he does, we know what he does as a running back, but then in terms of taking the next step for him to be the second back in the rotation, it's going to be what he can do as in pass protection and what he can do with as far as receiving. And he was targeted 6 times in minicamp, caught all 6 of them. He didn't have a single drop. Every ball that came his way, he caught. So I think that Jordan Mason, that's actually, I'm writing an article right now, and he's one of the guys that I think stood out to me during camp that really is elevating his game. And as you mentioned, Elijah Mitchell, he wasn't out there at all during the minicamp portion. And, he has a couple of drops to his name as well.
The guy who, in this last round, I thought Jamison was really impressive. Moody, you mentioned, made a 60-plus yard field goal. The leg strength is off the charts. But one guy who I think quietly looks really good to me as a receiver is Ronald Awatt from UTEP. And I went through his stats last night to just look at how he was utilized at UTEP. And I mean, he only had one game all year. He was against FAU, where he even had multiple receptions. So he only had 6 catches all of this year. But man, he catches the ball really, really naturally. I'm eager to see. I mean, the Niners have had a great run with undrafted free agent running backs, but Awatt is interesting. I mean, and he might be a back that they can utilize as a receiver out of the backfield. There's a lot to like there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out once we get to training camp. For me, the first training camp that I covered, it was pretty clear that Elijah Mitchell was a special back in the way that he was able to, just the way that he ran the ball. And, unfortunately, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And last year, I felt the same way about Jordan Mason. I haven't really felt that yet with Awatt or LeBourne, but both of these guys, there's a lot of people talking about them. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they do once they get into training camp. The rookies get to stay behind. They still get to work a little bit with the team, for I think the next week or two. So we'll see. They're going to go into their off-season program. They're going to have their marching orders on what they need to improve on. So it'll be fun to see how those two, Awatt, like you mentioned, and LeBourne as well, how they look when they come back in training camp.
Niners have $9.2 million against the cap. Frank Clark's now a Bronco. Leonard Floyd's now a Buffalo Bill. Are the 49ers, you think, set at defensive end? Ngakwe's still out there. There are other guys. Melvin Ingram is out there. Justin Houston is out there. Will they use some of their available cap to bring in another edge piece, or are they going to roll that over, trying to, keep one eye on 2024?
Well, I think the thing here is they can actually free up some cap space with the Nick Bosa deal, depending on how they structure it, because it can be lower than what his 5th-year option number was going to be this year. So they could actually create some cap space additionally there. It all depends on how they feel about Drake Jackson. If they feel like Jackson's not going to be the guy, then I could see them going out and getting a free agent. Even if they do feel like he's the guy, I think they could go get one. If they feel like he's the guy that they should go get is Justin Houston. I think Justin Houston fits the 49ers best as a situational pass rusher. He doesn't need to have a lot of snaps to produce. All the other ones that are out there all need to have 50, 60+% of the snaps in order to get that production. Justin Houston's not that good.
Give me the roster battle this summer outside of quarterback that, if I said to you, you could only study one roster battle besides quarterback all summer in training camp, what are you honing in on?
If it's any roster battle outside of quarterback, I think I would probably want to look at the linebacker spot. There's just so many guys there. We know who the starters are, but it's going to be what happens behind that. I think Warren Burks probably has a really strong case to be made to be the third backer on this team in terms of the starters. But beyond that, you've got a couple of rookies that are really good. You have some guys like Curtis Robinson are really good. How does Marcelino and Curry Ball fit in there? I really am looking forward to watching how that linebacker room fills out.
The one guy that we haven't talked about that I look at this team and especially in these last practices and I thought, wow, this guy is going to be really, really good. And it's Samuel Womack III. He's fast. He's athletic. He played a role as a rookie. I think he's going to be quite a bit better this year. I just love what I'm seeing out of Womack. And, I think if you said to me, give me the underrated aspect of the Niners, I would say the underrated aspect is Wilkes' addition on the secondary. Mm-hmm. I think the secondary is going to be better. I love Jair Brown. We've already talked about Deshaun Jameson. Luter, I think, has got a lot of potential. Isaiah Oliver is a significant guy, but don't go to sleep on Samuel Womack III. I think Womack could be a major, major player for them going forward. I love almost everything about that kid. I thought he was spectacular.
I agree. I think the 49ers are in a really good spot there. Diamador Lenore, he had a really strong end of his season once they put him out as a boundary corner from that point. From the point that he got to the boundary through the rest of the season, he actually put up better numbers against him than Travarius Ward did. You have Ward and him, though. That gives you a really good starting group. And I like Womack out there as well. And then one of these young guys to compete to fill in that other spot across from him. I think there would be a really good battle there.
One last chat. Trent Baalke's here. He says, the overanalyzing of minicamp is absurd, Lowry. Jack, I love the show. What a joke. People are overanalyzing minicamp. What do you guys think?
Hey, what do you give me for Trent Baalke and what was the guy? I can't remember his name right now, but he used to shoot himself out of cannons and stuff like that.
You're talking about Super Dave Osborne.
Super Dave Osborne. Yeah, those are the same guy, I think.
Oh man. And last one on the way out the door. If McKivitz is set at right tackle, and I believe he is, who's the swing tackle? We got a guy in the chat asking about Matt Pryor. To me, Matt Pryor looks a little sloppy-bodied, like he's not in great shape. I would probably lean towards Jalen Moore. But I'll tell you, the guy who, the more I watch him, the more I kind of like him is Leroy Watson. What do you think? Are the Niners set and on the backup at offensive tackle? And if not, who's the swing tackle?
I think it's going to be a good competition there between Moore and between those two guys and Pryor. Moore and Pryor are your top two. I think the other one there that you mentioned,
Leroy Watson.
Leroy Watson. He was a tight end with Spencer Burford there at UT San Antonio, and he's transitioned into tackle. I think he's more of a guy that's going to probably be on the practice squad. But I think it's really going to come down to Pryor and Jalen Moore and. It's your guess is as good as mine on where they go. I know Jalen Moore's been working out at the left tackle spot without Trent Williams on the field, and Pryor's been taking all the snaps with the two. So I think that gives you a little bit of an idea what they think so far.
By the way, RIP Super Dave. I didn't realize he's no longer with us. And Mark Graves said Marty Funkhauser, also from Curb Your Enthusiasm, one of the greatest shows ever created. Jack, tell us what you got cooking on your channel. We'll definitely keep chatting it up between now and training camp because we love your content. But what do you got cooking either today or in the days ahead on the Jackhammer Extravaganza? And if we're going to the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, what are we going to read? What are you writing about?
Yeah, well, for right now, I'm writing up just a quick recap of the off-season program, kind of what stood out to me, like my 5 main takeaways. That'll be up a little bit probably in the next hour or so. And then in terms of on the channel, just got to keep it locked in. There's always little tidbits. I'm putting up a lot of stuff in terms of videos from practice and then doing different little shorter clips in terms of my thoughts on the team. Yesterday talked about Trey Lance and the quarterback and kind of breaking down some fact versus fiction with his performance from the offseason. So stuff like that's going to be out there. I have a little thing coming up as far as that'll be posting later on today regarding the offense and kind of who I feel that wasn't a player necessarily, but where the change came at the quarterback position and the offensive as a whole. So keep it locked in. That'll be coming up this evening.
I never miss any of Jack Hammer or Larry Krueger's stuff. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan. And that's why I'm out here in Jacksonville, but I'm just thrilled they're on YouTube.
Jack, have a great Friday, man. And we'll talk to you soon. And man, keep it rolling. We loved your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Larry. And let's keep it going.
Sounds good. The great Jack Hammer in the house. L. Fox says, great show. Portola 45 says, Krug, Hammer, Barrows, only 3 you need to follow for 49er content. Wow. I don't know about that. There's some other people doing some really, really good stuff. All right. Thanks to Jack. Thanks to all of you. Check me out later today, 2:00 with Dan Dibley on 95.7 The Game. I'm getting ready to head into the city. But first, a word from our sponsors on The Krug Show.
A Sunday dinner. That means no matter how busy you were, no matter where the hell you were, you came to dinner on a Sunday night. Yeah, Sunday dinner without sausage, it's like a church without God. You know, how can you go to church if you don't believe in God? You know, and along with the sausage also became the discussions. That was discussion night. You know, it wasn't a typical family that you sit there and you're quiet, you know, and you don't talk with a mouthful. Oh no, man. Italians talk when they're eating. Italians even talk when they're sleeping. And definitely we talk with our hands. So if we can't express it through our mouth, through our lips, we express it with our hands. So, and that's what sausage is, really. It's an expression, you know, that life is good.
All right, back with you on the Krug Show. Thanks to Jack Hammer. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to our sponsors, New York Style Italian Sausage, Pig in a Pickle, Telmetrics.co for being proud sponsors. We got a brand new sponsor as well. We'll be thrown out here in the next couple days. Marin Auto Glass is now with us. So thank you to Saeed and all the good people at Marin Auto Glass for being sponsors of the Krueg Show as well. All right. I am done right now for the live stream, but man, I'm headed into the city. I'm going to be at 95.7 The Game with the great Dan Dibley from 2 to 6, sitting in for Willard on this Friday. Join me there. I know all of you will. And then we got a lot of great stuff planned throughout the weekend and next week. A lot of Niner content, some big name people stopping by between now and training camp. So keep it locked on the Krueg Show all throughout the month of June. We had 800,000 views of our content in May, with over 1 million estimated in June. So we're closing in on 19,000 subs, and all I can say is thank you to all of you guys, because I couldn't do it alone, and I don't do it alone. The great Len Dempsey helps me. My wife helps me quite a bit. My son, Kevin Krueger, helps me quite a bit, and they're all fantastic. And as Forktail Devil says, "You're lazy." You fucking lazy, Larry. You're lazy. I was in my bulky there and forgot my Urbanic. Yeah, so there you go. I'm not lazy. Not lazy today. I'm headed to the city to talk a little Warriors, little Giants, a little Niner mini camp and training camp with the great Dan Dibley. Hope everybody has a phenomenal Friday. Get outside and enjoy this beautiful early June weather. See ya on the game at 2.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful, you gon' get exactly what you asked for. Here for whatever you bring me, getting handled. I answer to no one, I don't need to ask.